This morning on BRN, rising food prices pose community challenges. And we're going to welcome back to the program Dr. David Anderson. He's an economist at Texas A&M University. Dr. Anderson, great to see you. Thanks for sharing your perspective this morning.
Hey, great to be with you today.
So I think when we looked at some of the inflation numbers, not too rosy to say the least. I know there's a lot of concern among economists around food prices. I want to get your reaction to some of the inflation numbers first, Doctor, if I could.
Sure. Well, I think the big one out there, particularly the one that, if we look at this data, some of the things hit us every day, right? Gasoline and food. Some are categories that we don't purchase very often. A new car, for instance, or things like that. But it's really the food stuff that really grabs us right up front. And I think the leading part of that is eggs. That's been in the headlines all over the place and continues to be. And so I think that's just really what grabs our attention. If we look at the inflation data, if we looked at the data on food particularly, it's egg prices that is the headline.
Yeah, and eggs, Doctor, they're in so many different types of ingredient. They're an ingredient in so many different types of foods. Whether you're making bread or you're making some kind of dish. I mean, ultimately, there's an egg there somewhere. But this is, if you look at that's the macro. But let's look at the micro. Where is this having an impact on the consumer and also our communities?
Well, I think it hits us a couple of places. And the first one I think really is, breakfast, right? We eggs are just plain a staple of breakfast. And so that catches our attention. I think you're right too, as we look at all the way for so many baked goods, if you're into baking, and a lot of holiday driven demand, which we might be past, Christmas and Thanksgiving, but that holiday driven demand is important in overall eggs because we use so many in baking. And so you can see that all around the store, through the center of the store, of your grocery store, but then back there in the egg case as well. So you see that. I think if we look at the restaurant segment, at least, certainly here where I live, I think we've had some real growth in breakfast centric restaurants. And eggs are just a huge portion of that. And so, it catches us both at restaurants, that breakfast meal, but also, at home cooking as well.
Yeah, it certainly does, and I think a lot of people. It also has an impact nutritionally, Doctor. I want to ask you about food pantries. In many of our communities here in the United States, food pantries serve a very important role because they help often the homeless or those that are financially challenged get supplies, get food, which obviously we all need in order to maintain life. But those food pantries, Doctor, are having a difficult time buying goods because they cost more. So therefore, their margins are actually narrowing.
So many of our food pantries, depend on donations,
Yeah.
whether it's money donations or food donations, all the way from, our churches to local organizations that feed folks who just need a helping hand. And, you know, one of the effects of inflation, while we can see that certainly we've got people who are, really strapped on their budgets. They may do a lot of hard work. They just don't make a lot of money. And to those who have lost their jobs, these food pantries are just, I think they're a huge part of our communities. And what inflation has done is it cuts the value of those monetary donations. They just don't go as far. Yet the demands are still there. We certainly saw that all the way from COVID, with lines at food pantries around the country, to what we see today. And inflation, I think a lot of times we don't think about those, but they rely on donations, and that the dollars just don't go as far.
Are there certain staples that maybe are? I mean, I think that, and we've talked to you about this before, Doctor. The avian flu has had a big impact on the price of eggs. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We've talked to you about that. We've talked to others about that. Should pantries and donations be focused on other areas? If you can't buy eggs and they're now $9 a dozen as opposed to $4 a dozen, whatever they were, maybe we shift to oats. I'm just making it up. I don't know the answer, but are there other staples that maybe could be part of the human diet instead of eggs?
Well, there are, as we think about, so many of our food pantries, some of our listeners might volunteer their time at these. Some of them might also be participants in these, or, receive some help when they needed it. And so many of those rely on, what I might think of as sort of staples of a food basket that are non-perishable, canned foods, peanut butter, tuna, beans, things like that. Yet many of the items like eggs, meat, milk, while we think of those as basic staples and pretty important in our diets, they're also very perishable and rely on refrigeration. And so not all food pantries are able to either receive those donations or to store them to hand out to people. So I think it's a lot of these other basics. One of the things that's driven egg demand, since we keep talking about eggs over a longer term, is as our diets, folks have been more interested in more protein in their diets. And eggs, that's a great source of protein. It's not the only source, and so we look for other items that can provide that maybe aren't perishable. And so certainly that's I think that's an important consideration. We think about the ability to store and hand out these perishable items that require refrigeration, I think really limits some of their use in some food pantries and type of activities.
Yeah, really well said, Doctor. I guess it's a wait and see. We're going to have to see if we can solve the avian flu, bring down egg prices overall, and maybe the food pantries can pivot to another staple or two. Dr. Anderson, we're going to conclude this episode or this part of our conversation. I'll bring you back tomorrow. I want to talk about how breakfast may be changing. You kind of hinted at it, but we'll talk about it again tomorrow. Dr. Anderson, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Thanks.
And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place. Details, of course, at our website. And your subscription supports all this great BRN content. Until tomorrow, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.